It was just past midnight when the knock came, 3 sharp raps against the heavy oak door of Solomon Sharp's home. His wife stirred. "Who's there?" "A friend," came the voice. Very calm. Measured. Moments later, the sound of feet scuffling on the porch, then a single cry, short and strangled. When the household servant rushed out with a candle, Solomon Sharp, one of Kentucky's most powerful politicians, was lying face down in a pool of blood. His throat had been cut so deep that his head nearly fell to one side. In his clenched hand, a single, torn piece of cloth. Within hours, the quiet capital would erupt with rumors. A crime of passion, a political assassination, a murder for love. And at the center of it all, a woman shamed, a man obsessed, and a promise written in blood. By the 1820s, Kentucky was still a young state, ambitious, proud, and raw. The frontier had become farmland, and the politics of Lexington and Frankfort were as fierce as any duel. At the top of it all stood Solomon P. Sharp, lawyer, legislator, and orator. Sharp had the rare mix of charisma and cunning that could win crowds and crush opponents. He'd risen from humble beginnings to serve as Attorney General and a leading member of the state legislature. In taverns, people called him the rising voice of Kentucky democracy. In private, his enemies called him ruthless. And one woman called him the man who ruined her life. Her name was Anna Cook, young, educated, and beautiful by all accounts. The daughter of a respected family, she was everything 1820s society demanded of a proper lady. But when rumors began to spread that Anna had given birth to a child out of wedlock, and that the father had refused to acknowledge it, her reputation collapsed overnight. The alleged father? Solomon Sharp. It began as whispered gossip. By 1820, it was front-page scandal. Anna denied nothing. She said Sharp had seduced her with promises of marriage, then vanished. The baby, she said, had been born still. Sharp's allies rushed to silence her, calling her delusional. His political opponents weaponized the story. For Anna, it meant social death. For Sharp, it was just another speech to outtalk. And watching this humiliation unfold was a young man, Jereboam Beauchamp, who would soon swear to avenge her honor. Beauchamp was only 21 when he first saw Anna Cook. He was a newly minted lawyer, ambitious but poor, studying under older attorneys in Bloomfield, Kentucky. To friends, he was serious, intelligent, idealistic, but also fiery, given to romantic notions of justice and honor. When he met Anna, she was already living in quiet disgrace, her family's wealth dwindling. To Beauchamp, she was not a fallen woman. She was a martyr, the symbol of every injustice done by powerful men. He visited her often, and those visits soon turned into courtship. In one surviving letter, he wrote, "You have been wronged before the eyes of men, and I shall right it. Your shame shall be avenged." Anna hesitated. She feared he was too young, too reckless. But he insisted. He would love her, defend her, and one day make Sharp pay. When they finally married in 1824, she made him promise one thing. He would not rest until Solomon Sharp was dead. In the political circles of Frankfort, Sharp's career was again on the rise. Despite the scandal, he had been re-elected to the legislature. His charm, his eloquence, his connections, all had survived the storm. But Beauchamp couldn't let it go. In his private journals, he began to write manifestos about honor, romantic, fevered passages that mixed the language of love and death. He described himself as an avenger of virtue and Anna as his sacred cause. As 1825 began, Beauchamp started traveling between Bloomfield and Frankfort under various pretexts, visiting friends, attending hearings, all while quietly tracking Sharp's movements. Witnesses later recalled seeing him alone in taverns, staring into his glass for hours. One barkeep said he whispered to himself, "It won't be long now." Frankfort, Kentucky, November 6, 1825. A chill wind cut through the streets that night. The lamps along Main Street burned low. Sharp's home, a 2-story brick house not far from the Capitol, was quiet, his wife asleep, the servants gone to bed. Around midnight, a knock sounded on the door. 3 times. Firm, deliberate. When Sharp answered, a man stood in the shadows. Some say he recognized him. Others claim he didn't. What happened next lasted less than a minute. Sharp's wife heard muffled voices, then a sudden struggle. When she rushed down, she found him collapsed in the hallway, blood spilling across the floorboards. The killer was gone, vanished into the night. All that remained was the torn piece of cloth in Sharp's hand and the echo of his wife's scream. By dawn, the news had spread across Frankfurt. "A legislator murdered in his home," shouted the morning writers. Rumors bloomed faster than facts. Some said it was political revenge. Sharp had been involved in bitter factional battles. Others whispered it was a jealous husband. But a few remembered Anna Cook, the woman Sharp had once humiliated. Within a week, suspicion turned to her husband, Jereboam Beauchamp. He was arrested, questioned, and searched. Among his belongings, officers found a bloody knife and a bundle of letters addressed to Anna, full of phrases like, "I shall cleanse your honor with his blood." In the weeks that followed, the courtroom would become a theater of obsession, of love, of madness. But beneath all the testimony and tears lay one terrifying truth. The murder of Solomon Sharp wasn't just a killing. It was a performance, written, rehearsed, and sealed with a vow made by two people who would rather die together than live dishonored. Before the murder, before the scandal, Anna Cook lived quietly on the edge of Bloomfield, Kentucky, a town of dusty roads and quiet eyes. Her home, once filled with laughter and guests, had grown silent. Her father's fortune had thinned, her brothers had moved away. In 1818, she had been a celebrated beauty, admired for her grace and education. Men courted her. Mothers pointed to her as the model of refinement. But by 1821, her name had become a curse whispered behind fans. The cause? A story too common, yet fatal for any woman of her time. Anna had loved, or believed she had loved, a man above her in status, one whose eloquence and charm promised safety. His name, Solomon Sharp. He visited her father's house often, speaking of law, politics, and poetry. Friends said he admired her intellect as much as her beauty. But one evening, in the stillness of the Cook parlor, that admiration crossed a line. When she later claimed he had seduced her under a promise of marriage, Sharp dismissed her publicly, calling her delusional. And in a world that judged women by reputation, her life ended in all but name. In early 1820, a small coffin was buried behind the Cook home, a stillborn infant. The town said nothing, but it was the silence that condemned her. Neighbors stopped calling. Church pews turned cold. Anna began wearing black, not for the child, but for herself. Her letters from that time, later read aloud in court, revealed the mind of a woman shattered by betrayal and isolation. "He walks among men as though nothing has happened. They cheer him still while I am made a ghost. If there is justice in heaven, it must come through mortal hands." Enter Jereboam Beauchamp, barely 21, ambitious, serious, a lawyer with fiery ideals and a heart too open for his own good. When he first met Anna in 1822, she was already infamous. Everyone warned him, "She will ruin you too." But Beauchamp saw something else, not a seductress, but a symbol of injustice. He began visiting her home, under the pretense of offering legal advice. Neighbors whispered again. He didn't care. He once told a friend, "She is not the fallen one. Kentucky is for failing her." Anna, older by nearly 10 years, tried to push him away. She told him to marry someone respectable. He refused. Instead, he proposed. 3 times. She accepted on one condition: he must restore her honor. Their marriage in 1824 was quiet. Few attended. No family blessed it. That night, Anna gave him a letter, written months before, sealed in wax. Inside, she detailed Sharp's betrayal, his words, and the humiliation she'd endured. At the end she wrote, "If my name is ever to live again, it must be written in his blood." Beauchamp kissed the letter and vowed aloud that he would kill Sharp for her. He wrote in his own journal that same night, "I have bound my soul to hers. If she dies, I die. If she is disgraced, I am disgraced. I will wash away the wrong that ruined her." From that day, their love became a pact, equal parts devotion and doom. Over the next year, Beauchamp's behavior changed. He withdrew from friends, left his law practice, and began studying old trials involving duels and crimes of honor. He visited the state capitol often, claiming it was for legal business. In truth, he was watching Sharp. At home, Anna kept his resolve alive. She would remind him of her pain, of the whispers that followed her every time she went to market. "They look at me as though I carry plague," she told him, "and he still walks free." Beauchamp began referring to Sharp not as a man, but as a beast unworthy of mercy. Anna wrote back with approval, "Then do not give him mercy." By the autumn of 1825, Beauchamp was consumed. He dreamed of the murder, rehearsed it, romanticized it. His letters became strange, filled with phrases like, "My destiny approaches," and "I am the sword of her redemption." To his friends, he seemed distracted, nervous. To Anna, he was radiant, her knight, her savior. She prepared his traveling cloak herself, sewed his initials into it, placed a folded note in the lining. "When it is done, come home to me." He kissed her goodbye on November 5, 1825, and rode toward Frankfurt. When news of Solomon Sharp's death reached Bloomfield, Anna didn't faint or scream. She simply closed her eyes and whispered, "It is finished." That night, she burned every letter Sharp had ever written her and prayed over the ashes. But their peace was short-lived. Within days, rumors spread that the avenger was known. Witnesses had seen Beauchamp in Frankfurt the night before the killing. The governor had ordered an arrest. When the constables arrived, Anna refused to let them take him. She clung to him, pleading, "You have done this for me, now let me go with you." The officers separated them. Beauchamp didn't resist. He looked at her once and said, "Do not weep. Our story is not yet done." From his cell in Frankfurt jail, Beauchamp wrote to Anna daily. The letters were feverish, equal parts love poetry and confession. "I see his face in my dreams and your face beside it. When they hang me, you must stand near. Let them see we were never ashamed." Anna visited when she could, sometimes disguised. She began to talk of joining him, not in escape, but in death. They spoke of dying together, as lovers vindicated before God. The guards thought it was madness, but to them, it was devotion perfected. As the trial date neared, Kentucky braced for spectacle. The newspapers promised a confession to shake the nation. But what they would soon hear was not a confession of guilt. It was a love story, one that would end not with a verdict, but with two graves side by side. At first, they thought it was political. A powerful legislator slain in the Capitol? That had to be revenge from a rival faction, a message carved in blood. But the knife that cut Solomon Sharp's throat wasn't wielded by an enemy of policy. It was held by a man who believed he was fulfilling a vow of love. And in tracing that blade back to its source, investigators would uncover something far darker than politics, a love story gone to rot. When dawn broke over Frankfurt on November 7, 1825, the usually quiet capital was alive with chaos. Messengers on horseback rode from the governor's residence to the courthouse, from the courthouse to the state house, each spreading the same chilling sentence. "Mr. Sharp has been murdered." The body of Solomon P. Sharp, found in the hallway of his home, bore the signs of a deliberate and intimate killing. A single fatal slash to the neck, deep enough to silence him instantly. The weapon, a sharp-edged knife, was missing. But near the body, the sheriff found a clue, a fragment of dark fabric, torn and gripped tightly in the victim's hand. That scrap, and one whispered name, would soon ignite Kentucky's first national scandal. As investigators interviewed Sharp's friends and political allies, one name surfaced repeatedly in half-spoken tones: Anna Cook Beauchamp. Sharp had history with her, one politician said, avoiding the word affair. Another leaned in closer, and her husband, that young lawyer, he swore vengeance once, didn't he? By the second day, law officers had ridden the 50 miles to Bloomfield, where Jereboam Beauchamp lived with Anna. He didn't flee, didn't hide. When the sheriff arrived, he was sitting by the fire, polishing his boots. "You're wanted in Frankfurt," the officer said. Beauchamp simply nodded. "For Sharp's murder?" The sheriff hesitated. Beauchamp stood up calmly. "I know. As they placed him in custody, Anna clung to him, weeping. He whispered something to her, too soft for the men to hear, but one deputy swore he caught the words, "They'll never part us." When Beauchamp arrived in Frankfurt, the governor himself demanded an immediate inquiry. The newspapers had already gone wild with speculation. A crime of passion? Political revenge or private honor? Inside his rented lodging, officers found a blood-stained knife hidden under floorboards, several letters in Beauchamp's hand describing vengeance, a cloak with a torn hem, the exact pattern of fabric found in Sharp's fist. When confronted, Beauchamp didn't deny the items were his, but claimed he had no recollection of that night. The investigators pressed harder. Finally, he sighed and said, "If I tell you, you must swear her name remains unstained." On November 10th, Beauchamp confessed to the murder, but not out of guilt, out of pride. He declared that Solomon Sharp had defiled a woman's honor, that no gentleman could suffer such insult unpunished. In his words, "I did what any true husband would. I have washed her name clean." When asked why he struck in the night, he replied, "Because daylight belongs to politics, and this was a matter of the heart." The prosecutor noted the line word for word. It would appear later in every newspaper headline in America. While Jereboam sat in jail, Anna refused to eat. She paced their home like a widow. Her letters to him grew frantic. "They say they will hang you. If they do, I shall join you. We swore to be one in all things, life and death alike." She began signing her name not as Anna Cook Beauchamp, but "Your wife until eternity." When the sheriff returned to serve a subpoena, she begged him to take her to Frankfurt. He refused. Within days, she appeared there anyway, uninvited, defiant, wearing black. She rented a room near the jail and visited daily, her presence turning the case into a public obsession. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse just to catch a glimpse of her carriage. They called her the Avenger's Bride. On May 8, 1826, the trial of Jereboam Beauchamp began in Frankfurt Circuit Court. It was a spectacle, part legal proceeding, part tragic theater. The courtroom overflowed with citizens, journalists, even legislators. Some came to condemn him, others came to romanticize him. The prosecutor painted Beauchamp as a fanatic, consumed by pride and obsession. The defense countered that he was a man driven by love and honor, provoked beyond endurance by Sharp's betrayal. Every word was printed, dissected, debated. Kentucky was split down the middle. Half saw a monster, half saw a martyr. The most explosive moment came when the prosecutor presented letters written by both Jereboam and Anna. One, in her delicate handwriting, read, "He has ruined me, and still the world kneels to him. Will you not deliver justice?" Another, from Beauchamp, "My darling, I have seen his face in my dreams. I will make him remember your tears." The judge demanded that these letters be sealed from the press, but it was too late. Reporters had already copied them. By the next morning, they were printed in the Louisville Public Advertiser. The public was captivated not by the crime, but by the romance beneath it. After 10 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. They returned a single verdict. "We find the prisoner guilty of murder in the first degree." Beauchamp received the sentence of death by hanging. He bowed his head only once, when Anna screamed from the gallery and fainted. As guards led him away, he turned back to her and said softly, "Fear not, my love. They can hang my body, but not my vow." In the weeks that followed, Kentucky would watch the condemned man and his wife turn a prison cell into a shrine. Their letters grew darker, full of talk of heaven, unity, and poison. And as the date of execution approached, whispers spread that they had a plan, one that would bind them forever, even beyond the gallows. "I would rather die with him than live without him." Those were the words that turned a murder trial into a Gothic legend. After the verdict, the courtroom faded, but inside Frankfurt jail, a different story began, not of guilt or punishment, but of devotion sharpened into madness. This wasn't justice anymore. It was a love story with a death sentence. The cell reserved for condemned men sat at the back of Frankfurt jail, damp and dimly lit by a single barred window. It was here that Jereboam Beauchamp, barely 26 years old, awaited his execution. Each morning he was given water, bread, and paper. He used none of them as intended. Instead, he filled the pages with letters to Anna, to God, and to history itself. "I am not a murderer," he wrote. "I am a husband who avenged the ruin of his bride. They may condemn my body, but my soul is blameless before heaven." Outside, the newspapers turned his words into myth. They called it the crime of honor. Young men toasted his noble courage. Poets began composing verses about the avenger of woman's virtue. But for Anna, there was no poetry left, only a growing darkness. Against all expectation, Anna Cook Beauchamp petitioned to live with her husband in prison until his hanging. To everyone's astonishment, the warden, pressured by public fascination and her relentless pleading, allowed her partial access. Each day she was permitted a few hours in his cell. What began as visitation became something else entirely. Guards reported seeing them sitting together for hours, whispering prayers, then laughing softly like newlyweds. They kept a Bible, 2 pens, and a shared notebook they titled The Vindication. Inside, they began writing their joint confession, a document meant to explain, justify, and immortalize their actions. It read like a tragic duet. "Jereboam, the world may hang me as a felon, but I am her champion. Anna, he struck for my honor." His hand was guided by love and by heaven. They weren't just preparing for death, they were romanticizing it. The vindication was both confession and farewell letter to the world. By late spring of 1826, whispers circulated through Frankfurt that the Beauchamps had made a secret vow. A local reverend recalled her words, "If they take him, they shall take me too." The governor offered clemency if Jereboam would publicly repent. He refused. "I cannot ask mercy for justice done." Anna wrote to the governor herself, begging to die beside her husband. The plea was denied. From then on, she began carrying a small satchel to every visit. A sewing kit, the guards assumed. But in truth, hidden among the cloth was a small vial of laudanum and a second, smaller flask wrapped in silk. She had already decided how their story would end. As the date of execution approached, July 7, 1826, their writing grew frantic. "We will not let them tear us apart," Jereboam wrote. "We shall ascend together." Anna's letters were even more haunting. "They think death will end us. They do not understand love such as ours. We will meet in eternity and smile upon their cruelty." They wrote through the night before the hanging. When guards came to check, they found the two of them sitting side by side, holding hands through the bars. Her head rested on his shoulder. The candle between them had burned down to wax. On the final page of the vindication, Jereboam scrawled one line, "At dawn, we become one." Just before sunrise, the guards unlocked the cell. Inside Kiss, Anna lay collapsed on the floor, her dress soaked in dark fluid, an empty vial clutched in her hand. Beside her, Beauchamp was slumped against the wall, blood pooling beneath him. He had driven a knife into his own chest, the very knife she had smuggled in beneath her skirts. He was still alive, barely. "Is she?" he gasped. The guard nodded, trembling. "She's gone," Beauchamp whispered. "Then so am I." Doctors rushed to stop the bleeding, but his wound was mortal. Still, officials, cold in their procedure, ordered the hanging to proceed as planned. At noon, July 7th, a crowd of thousands gathered in Frankfurt. Beauchamp, pale and weak, was carried to the scaffold in a chair. As the sheriff read his sentence, he looked out toward the sky and murmured, "Anna waits for me." Minutes later, the trapdoor fell. The crowd fell silent. And with that, Kentucky's most infamous love story came to an end. After the execution, their bodies were placed side by side, as Anna had begged, and buried together in a single grave. Their tombstone bore a joint inscription, "United in life, united in death." But even in death, the Beauchamps refused to fade. Their joint confession, The Vindication, was published weeks later, igniting debates that would rage across America for decades. Some saw them as murderers, others as tragic lovers. But one thing was undeniable, The Beauchamp affair had left an indelible scar on the nation's conscience. And just when the story seemed finished, another letter surfaced, one that suggested Anna's death may not have gone as everyone believed. A year after the hanging, a small chest was discovered in the archives of Frankfurt jail. Inside lay pages never meant for public eyes, Anna's hidden letters, written in the weeks before her death. And they revealed something no one had dared to believe: Anna may have tried to live. When the gallows were dismantled and the crowds dispersed, Kentucky was left in stunned silence. Politicians tried to move on. Preachers called it a warning against passion unchecked. But the people, the ordinary townsfolk, couldn't stop talking. Women visited the grave with flowers. Men debated in taverns whether Beauchamp was a murderer or a martyr. Every version of the story changed slightly with the telling. By autumn 1826, pamphlets titled "The Vindication of Beauchamp and His Bride" appeared across the state. The joint confession became a literary sensation, America's first true crime bestseller. But the real Anna's voice, the raw, private one, had been missing until now. In 1827, a clerk cataloging evidence from the trial found a bundle wrapped in faded lace. They were addressed simply, "To be opened when I am gone." The handwriting was unmistakable, Anne's. But these letters were different from the grand declarations of the vindication. They were vulnerable, fearful, human. "He grows pale each day, speaking of heaven as if it waits outside the window. Yet my heart trembles, I do not wish to die." Another read, "If only there were a way to save him without joining him. But he would never forgive such cowardice." They were dated just 3 days before the supposed double suicide. The tone was clear: Anna hadn't been ready to die. Some historians believe she took the poison only because she feared he would do it first. Others think she hoped the dose would only make her ill, long enough to be with him at the gallows. Either way, the result was fatal. The vindication spread far beyond Kentucky. Newspapers in New York, Boston, even London printed excerpts. Readers were divided, some horrified, others spellbound. To the moralists, Anna was Eve reborn, tempting her husband into sin. To the romantics, she was Juliet with a pen instead of a dagger. The truth, as always, lay somewhere between. Scholars would later call their writing America's first crime of passion memoir. It inspired plays, novels, and folk songs. But as the legend grew, so did the distortions. The politics vanished, the affair softened, until what remained was a tragic fable of love destroyed by honor. And beneath that myth, the real people disappeared. For decades, travelers visited the Beauchamp gravesite in Bloomfield. Couples left ribbons tied to the iron fence, a superstition that such devotion could bind lovers forever. Some swore they heard whispers when the wind passed through the willow trees. By the mid-1800s, the story had become local folklore. Parents warned daughters, "Beware the vengeance of a wounded heart." Young men recited Beauchamp's lines as if they were poetry. But time, as always, eroded the edges. The tombstone cracked, the epitaph faded. Only the rumor endured that Anna's spirit still lingered, not out of love, but out of regret. In 1895, historian Mary K. McDowell unearthed Anna's letters while compiling a record of Kentucky trials. Her notes included a chilling observation. The woman's hand falters near the end, as if she wrote under fear, not faith. "I do not believe she longed for death. I believe she was convinced of it." McDowell published excerpts under the title, "The Widow's Secret." The revelation reframed the Beauchamp tragedy, from a tale of romantic unity to one of emotional captivity. Modern psychologists would later call it shared delusion, a condition where love, isolation, and obsession merge until the boundaries of self disappear. What the world had celebrated as devotion might, in truth, have been a quiet form of coercion. In the end, history rarely tells us what truly happened between two hearts. Was Jereboam Beauchamp a villain who hid behind chivalry, or a man poisoned by a culture that prized female virtue above female life? Was Anna Cook a partner in vengeance, or a woman trapped inside her husband's mythology? Their story, preserved through ink and myth, asks one final question. When love and honor collide, which one survives? Nearly 2 centuries later, the echo of that midnight knock still haunts Kentucky. Not because of the blood that was spilled, but because of what it revealed: how easily love can disguise itself as justice, and how two hearts, convinced of purity, can burn down the world in their own defense.